Good morning, everyone. Hello to those of you who are just joining us for this one, and welcome back to those of you who are just watching the previous presentation. I'm Kylie Merritt from AusBiz. We're going to jump straight into this one, which is a presentation and then a Q&A from Chimeric. This is obviously a therapeutics company. They're in a clinical stage cell therapy company focused on bringing the promise of cell therapy to life for patients with cancer. There's a whole lot that I'll let the people who know really what they're talking about go through, but we're looking here particularly for the treatment of patients with glioblastoma. And there's been a lot of development going on with scientists at the City of Hope Medical Center in California. These are peptides that they've been developing derived from scorpion toxin. Really, really interesting stuff. I'm going to hand over to the team from Chimeric now. You're going to hear from Paul Hopper, the Executive Chairman, and the Chief Operating Officer, Jennifer Chow. Of course, don't forget, guys, as the presentation is being gone through, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you do have a question for either Paul or Jennifer, please pop those questions in as we're going, and we'll do a Q&A session at the end. But let's not waste any more time. I'm going to hand over now to Paul Hopper, the Executive Chair.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. We appreciate you coming in on the call to hear what we're up to. And those of you who are shareholders, thank you for your support from the IPO and subsequent to that. I just want to say a few words before I hand it to Jen, who will run you through the slide presentation. The first thing is to really emphasize what a coup it was to acquire such a promising phase 1 asset in CAR T therapy. CAR Ts fall under the banner or the umbrella of cell therapy, and acquiring something like this by an AS-listed biotech company was really quite a coup, and we're very excited about it. I'm going to hand you to Jen, but before I do that, I wanted to talk about the quality of the team, and in particular, Jen. This company has an astounding senior management team who have come from arguably the leading CAR T companies globally, and in particular, Kite, which is probably the most successful CAR T company, where Jen was the global head of commercial in a job, not looking to join me. And the other colleague is Syed Rizvi, who's our Chief Medical Officer, who came from Legend. And you may know that Legend was the largest biotech IPO on NASDAQ last year. And Syed was the Chief Medical Officer at that CAR T company. So we really have the cream of the crop. And then more recently, Jen was joined by another one of her colleagues, Elliot Burke, who has come on board as VP of Business Development. So we have a quality team, world class, and you'll hear from Jen in a second. We have a great year ahead, lots of exciting news. A lot of people have been calling us, medical institutions, other companies in the CAR T space. So I think it's going to be a particularly productive year for us. So Jen, can I hand over you to take us through the slides?
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. We have been very busy in the past few months, and we're excited to give you a bit of an update on what we've been doing. Just quick disclaimer, I will leave that there. So Chimeric Therapeutics, we are very much focused on bringing the promise of cell therapy to life. And hopefully I'll be able to give you a little bit more insight into what that means to each of us. We're a clinical stage cell therapy company, and we were founded on what we believe is very promising asset, the Clorotoxin CAR T from City of Hope. We've had 2 capital raisings totaling about $39.3 million. And as most of you know, we were listed on the ASX in January. We're now further developing our oncology pipeline with additional cell therapies that we believe will be able to provide benefit to more cancer patients around the world. And we actually feel that, as Paul was mentioning, with the team that we're starting to build out that really have depth in cell therapy development and commercialization, that we are in a great place and have a really unique ability to be able to bring assets through development to commercialization by working with some of the world's top scientists. So for us, cell therapy, if I just take a step back, you know, what is cell therapy when you hear all the noise about this, and certainly all of the investment level? Most simply, cell therapy is the transfer of live cells into a patient to help them cure a disease. And when you think about cell therapy in its most simple form, think about a blood transfusion. You're transfusing cells into a patient to help them with anemia or MDS. We've advanced those very simple types of cell therapies into engineered cell therapies, and that's what's really driven a lot of the investment that you've seen in this area over the past number of years. In 2020 alone, there was about $20 billion worth of investment in cell therapy, and a lot of it is happening in very small companies, early stage assets. Paul mentioned Legend Biotech, where our chief medical officer comes from. It had an IPO in 2020 for $487 million. And you can see that that's been consistently repeated then with organizations like Sana Biotech, who recently had an IPO nearly $600 million. The follow-on offerings and partnerships, as you can see listed there, are really for assets that are very early stage preclinical assets in stage 1 or phase 1 development. And the reason that the investment is so strong is really because of what we're referring to as the promise of cell therapy. And for us, that's what this looks like. Cell therapy really is able to offer patients something that they haven't seen before in cancer. It's able to offer curative potential. And we've seen that already with the CAR T cell therapies that are approved currently for lymphoma. What you see on the right-hand side is a Kaplan-Meier curve, which really just talks about the percentage of patients with a disease that are alive over a period of time. And with cancer treatment, what you saw is with chemotherapy, when we introduced chemotherapies 20 years ago, we actually were providing patients with a benefit over doing nothing. And so they were living longer with chemotherapy. When we introduced immunotherapies maybe 10 years ago, we built off that and we were able to extend survival for patients with cancer even longer. Why so many people are interested in cell therapy is because we've been able to now make a monumental jump in survival for patients with cell therapies. And we really see this come through in the first CAR T therapies that were approved in lymphoma. And this is why for us, it's such an important thing to make sure that we're able to bring this promise of cell therapy through to more patients in more disease areas. So for Chimeric, the very first cell therapy that we are working on, as many of you know, is Clorotoxin CAR T. And the Clorotoxin CAR T really works on what is probably the most well-known type of cell therapy right now. CAR T is a type of cell therapy that modifies a patient's own immune cells. And so essentially, you're using your own immune cells after a little bit of engineering help to work against your own cancer. And what you see here, and I apologize, the diagrams are probably a little hard to read, but what you see here is the process of CAR T therapy. A patient starts by having basically a blood draw. The blood is spun down, and the T cells from that blood are isolated, and they are then sent off to a manufacturing facility. The manufacturing facility engineers those cells, and then they send the cells back to the patient for infusion. And generally that process takes somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks. What you see in the middle is then what happens once those CAR T cells are infused into the patient. Essentially, the CAR T cells with these CAR receptors now go seeking out the cancer cells. And you can see how when they find the right cancer cells, they fit very neatly together to attach or bind themselves. And once those CAR T cells are able to attach to the cancer cells, as you see on the right-hand side, they're actually able to send a signal to attack the cancer cell and ultimately kill the cancer cell. And so this is why or how CAR T therapy has been so successful with some of the patient groups that it's actually been working with already. For Chimeric, the exciting piece is being able to use this therapy in glioblastoma. And so our first asset, Clorotoxin CAR T, actually uses Clorotoxin as its tumor targeting domain. And so that is the piece that really goes looking for the glioblastoma tumor cells. This is an asset which Chimeric has exclusive global rights to, and we also have great IP protection on as well. As I'm sure many of you have heard, one of the very unique factors or things about this particular CAR T is that it's derived from Clorotoxin, which is from Deathstalker scorpion venom. and that's what it uses as its tumor targeting domain. And that Deathstalker scorpion venom actually has been used in patients with glioblastoma as radiotherapy and as a diagnostic agent. So we do already know that it's safe to be able to use in patients. And what we believe is by the way that the chlorotoxin actually binds to a number of different cancer cells, we believe this asset will have promise in being able to help patients with multiple different types of cancer. But we've started our clinical trials and our investigations in glioblastoma. And glioblastoma, as probably many of you know, is one of the most common and most lethal types of brain cancer. There's about 300,000 patients around the world that are diagnosed with glioblastoma every year, about 2,000 in Australia alone, and predominantly men. Patients that are diagnosed with glioblastoma are often really given very, very poor outlook. What you see is that only 38 or 40% of patients will actually even survive 1 year, and a really sad 5% are expected to survive 5 years. And what you see from a drug discovery or treatment perspective is there's only 3 agents approved for treatment of glioblastoma. And so these patients have an incredible high unmet medical need. What we saw with Clorotoxin is incredible preclinical evidence that would suggest to us that Clorotoxin is going to be able to work against patients' glioblastoma very effectively. And what you see here is some of the preclinical evidence. On the left-hand side, what you see is how does Clorotoxin actually bind to those glioblastoma cells? And what the graph there is showing you, particularly the line that's highlighted or the column that's highlighted in red and is all bright green, is that Clorotoxin binds extremely strongly to glioblastoma cells, much more so than other things that people have tried to use to bind to those cells. In the middle, what you see is some evidence that suggests that the Clorotoxin CAR T, as it binds to the glioblastoma cells, which is incredibly important, it doesn't actually bind to healthy tissue, which is equally important because you don't want it binding and hurting or killing healthy tissue. So that really gives us a sense that we're starting to see some preclinical safety. And then on the far right-hand side, what you see is the anti-tumor activity, or really how is Clorotoxin able to kill those glioblastoma cells? And what you see there is the green line that goes straight across the top are mice that were given Clorotoxin, and they continue to survive. Whereas mice that were not given Clorotoxin, actually you can see they passed away between 100 and 125 days. So all of this preclinical evidence gives us a really strong sense that this asset is something very unique, and within GBM patients who have such a high unmet need has great potential. With that, as probably many of you know, we headed into our phase 1 clinical trial in September of last year. The primary objective of that trial is really to establish the safety of the CAR T cells for patients with MMP2 recurrent GBM, and then to be able to assess what will be the right dose to be able to move forward into a phase 2 dosing plan. Within this trial, we anticipate that we will actually treat somewhere between 18 and 36 patients. And you can see that what we are doing is we're what we call dose escalating. We're starting at a very low dose when we first put this into humans, and then we're slowly increasing the dose over time to really try to come to the most effective dose possible for patients without causing too much toxicity. We're also uniquely starting with one mode of administration of the CAR T cells, and you can see it kind of highlighted on the diagram at the very bottom of the schematic, which is just intratumoral. So essentially what happens for a patient is they have an operation and the surgeon will resect their tumor as best they can. They will then insert a catheter, and that catheter will actually just stay in the patient's head, and that will allow us to infuse the CAR T cells directly into the tumor cavity. And so that's the first means or mode of administration, is the intratumoral. So our very first set of patients are dosed just through an intratumoral mode of administration. And they're dosed at this very low dose of 44 million cells, or what we refer to as 44 times 10 to the 6 T cells. As we then are able to move forward, and that only occurs after we clear off this first dose level, we actually will then increase the dose and we will add a second mode of administration, intraventricular delivery. And so we'll actually be infusing the CAR T cells directly into the patient's brain in 2 different areas as we increase the dose. So the first dose level here, the note, just so everybody to bring your attention to the FDA mandated staggered dose. Really what this means is that we can only treat patients 1 at a time. And this is something that the FDA mandates for all cell therapy trials. And so this is common to see in early cell therapy trials, that you have to treat a patient and then wait for 4 to 6 weeks to see how that patient does before you're able to treat another patient. And so sometimes that makes the beginning of cell therapy trials go a little bit more slowly. What we're very pleased to be able to announce today, actually, and this is very hot off the press, is that we have now completed the dosing of our first patient cohort. And that is this patient cohort here at the bottom that's highlighted, that had the singular intratumoral delivery of the 44 million cells. And so that cohort, we have dosed the last patient. As that last patient is able to clear the dose limiting toxicity period, we will then be able to hopefully move to the next dose level with our next patient. So this is news we're very pleased, and this marks a very significant milestone for our clinical development track, because it allows us to then move forward to what we hope are stronger doses for patients, to the dual delivery for patients, and also it allows us to move forward without the FDA mandated stagger as well. So very important milestone for us to be able to show that early safety in patients that allows us to go forward this way. So we're very pleased to be able to make that announcement today. From this particular trial, this phase 1 trial, when we finish this phase 1 trial, we actually anticipate that we will be moving very rapidly into a phase 2 trial that will be a pivotal phase 2 trial. As there is such a high unmet medical need in glioblastoma, and we are working with a cell therapy, we believe that the phase 2 pivotal trial with approximately 80 patients will allow us to be able to commercialize this particular therapy. And we anticipate that when we start this phase 2 trial, which we're actually working on all of the development for right now, we'll have a number of sites around the world that will be open and offering the therapy as part of the trial. So this is something that we have in the works, and I'm very much are starting to get ready as we come out of that phase 1 trial. Additionally, as we know that Clorotoxin actually has an ability to bind to other tumors and not just GBM, we are starting now to develop and design a phase 1 basket trial that will allow us to look at a number of other solid tumors and how Clorotoxin works against them. And what you see here is a representation of what those tumors that we're planning to look at are: metastatic melanoma, sarcoma, colorectal cancer, small cell lung cancer, and prostate cancer. And so we're designing and developing this trial now so that we can then similarly take a look at how Clorotoxin works in these other solid tumors. Outside of Clorotoxin, we're also very excited, and we are very, very busy in terms of looking at how do we build out our pipeline and our portfolio. We're focused, as I said, on bringing that promise of cell therapy to patients, and that means really looking at what are the other novel cell therapies that are being developed that can really help patients. We're starting by looking at novel CAR designs. And so right now what we have is CAR T therapies like Clorotoxin, for example, that binds using one tumor targeting domain. Some of the things that we're looking at now bind using 2 tumor targeting domains. We're looking at allogeneic cell sources. And so just to give you a little context, what I talked to you about with CAR T, that the patient's cells are taken out of their body and they're shipped off to a manufacturing facility and they're returned, and that own patient cells is referred to as an autologous process. An allogeneic process essentially is when you're able to use somebody else's cells. And so an allogeneic process, you're not using a patient's own cells, you're using somebody else's cells and they become engineered. But the benefit of an allogeneic therapy is generally you don't have to wait. It's off the shelf and it's readily available. And then we're also looking at building out our pipeline with some of the alternative cell types. The CAR T cell therapy that we're working with really focuses on using T cells. There are a number of other alternative cell types that are being developed or therapies that are being developed. And for our pipeline, we're really looking at how we expand into that. With all of that going on, I think I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that we believe that our experience and expertise in cell therapy gives us is a real unique ability to be able to overcome some of the challenges that exist in development and commercialization in this space. And so because of the way cell therapies are actually manufactured in facilities across the world very often, and patient cells go away and they come back, there's a lot of complexity involved that has to be managed very carefully as we develop and commercialize. And I think we believe very strongly that by bringing in people into our organization that have really been at the forefront of doing this for the last number of years, we're in a really unique position to be able to bring our assets through development to commercialization as quickly and as easily as possible. So we're very excited about continuing to build out our team with this type of experience. And I think Paul mentioned at the beginning, Syed and I actually joined the company at the same time. And most recently, Dr. Elliot Burke has joined us last week. We're also very happy that we're pleased that we have a very experienced board of directors that is actually able to provide us great oversight and governance. Paul, who many of you know at the beginning and met at the beginning, Leslie Russell, Leslie Chong, and Cindy Elkins, who all have incredible experience in glioblastoma, in commercial and clinical development, and Cindy also in cell therapy space. So over the course of the next year, or over the course of, I guess, the 2021, what we really see we'll be focusing on is continuing the development in our glioblastoma trial. We will be actually really preparing for that phase 2 trial so that we're able to move rapidly to it. We anticipate that towards the second half of this year, we'll be able to give everybody a little bit more information, a clinical trial patient update, and we'll be already by the end of the year heading into 2022 for that phase 2 trial. We'll also, as I said, be building out Clorotoxin and other tumor types. We're going to be exploring a lot of opportunities to collaborate with a lot of scientists around Clorotoxin and bring in new assets to build out our pipeline at the same time. So finally, maybe just kind of bringing it all together, we believe at Chimeric that this is really an inspired focus. I can tell you personally, when you look at those Kaplan-Meier curves that I showed you at the beginning, the curves should probably be replaced by pictures of people, because that's what they truly represent. And that's what is so inspiring about this space. I've been very fortunate in that I've had the ability to meet patients who were told that they really did not have that long to live, and they were able to receive a CAR T. And 4 and 5 years later, I'm still receiving emails and texts and updates from them on what's going on in their life. And I think once you have that kind of experience, it's incredibly inspiring, and you really want to be able to affect other patients and bring these therapies to other patients. So I think we really have that inspired focus. We believe that Clorotoxin is incredibly promising for GBM, but also potentially in a number of other solid tumors. We're focused on expanding the pipeline to be able to bring more novel cell therapies into the company to develop and commercialize. And we believe that we are building a team that has the right expertise to be able to bring that through. So with that, I will stop there and maybe see if there are any questions.
There are indeed, Jennifer, thank you. We have, excuse me, quite a few questions to get to in about sort of 6 or 7 minutes. I'm hoping we can just get a little bit more color from you guys, though, around the timing of phase 1 and phase 2, because quite a few of these questions are, when do you anticipate moving from phase 1 to phase 2? When do you anticipate being able to give an update on the phase 1 trial? another question. This is all kind of related. What factors are coming into consideration when deciding on opening up a second clinic for the phase 1 trial? So perhaps if you could just give us a little bit more information on that timeline. I know you did touch on it in the presentation, but perhaps some more information around that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the trial itself, the phase 1 trial timeline, we anticipate that trial to be an 18 to 24 month timeline. And so we started that in September of 2020. So 2 years would take you out to September of 2022. We are optimistic that that is close to when we would start to look at the phase 2 trial. And so we really need to be able to see the signal and identify the correct dose in the phase 1 trial to be able to move forward to the phase 2 trial. Maybe to give everybody a bit of a sense of the timing with CAR Ts or with cell therapy, what you've seen with the therapies that have been approved, like Chimeric or Yescarta, moving from phase 1 all the way to commercialization has taken about 4 years for those companies. And so those are really the timelines that we're aspiring to as well, to try and continue to move our development forward.
Okay.
Sorry, Kylie, that was hopefully the timelines on the phase 1 and phase 2. I'm not sure if there was another piece there as well.
The other part that was associated was that with what factors are coming into consideration when deciding on opening up a second clinic for the phase 1 trial, and when will you likely make that decision?
Yes. So when we think about opening up a second clinic for the phase 1 trial, we really will be looking, first of all, we'll have to make a decision of whether or not that makes the most sense is to open up a second site. In the event that we do, we would probably look at opening it as we move to sort of what we call the phase 1 expansion part of our trial. And so that's after we've found the right dose and treated maybe 18 to 20 patients. And then we would be working on the expansion part of the trial, and that's when we would look to do it. In terms of the factors, we'll be looking for people that have, a site potentially that has cell therapy experience, because obviously this is a phase 1 clinical trial. And so there's a number of limited sites that are able to actually host phase 1 trials.
Mm-hmm. I know you spoke in the presentation about, the importance of starting with very low doses and moving those up. We have a question here, is CLTX CAR T expected to be safer than the other current CAR T treatments? In particular, is it less likely to result in patients suffering from side effects like cytokine storms?
Right. And I think, the current CAR T therapies are given in a different way. So they're given as an infusion, and they go throughout the whole body. And so you do see that they have side effects like the cytokine release syndrome, or CRS, that people hear about. And they also have some neurotox. Right now, we are optimistic that potentially there is a profile here that will not, the safety that we're seeing will not be as severe as what you're seeing with the hematological CARs. But I think that's something that we continue to, want to watch evolve as we move up those doses.
Okay. A question from Michael. Can you elaborate more on the patents, what they cover? Are they still pending approval? And what is the timing of the approval?
Yes. And maybe Paul, do you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. They have been approved, and their life is about, I think, 2036.
Okay. A question from Brendan. Will recruitment speed increase now the FDA mandated dosing phase has ended?
Yes. And so that's one of the reasons why I think we're very pleased that this initial cohort that has been dosed.
Okay, there's questions coming in.
Yeah,
there's questions coming in thick and fast, but I've been told that we've only got 1 more minute, so I'm just going to have to pick one last one from Trevor. How much does the phase 1 and phase 2 trials cost? But probably can't be answered in 30 seconds or less, but just
No, unfortunately, Kylie, that's a very difficult one to answer.
Okay, look, we will have to wind it up, but I know we haven't got through all the questions. If you're on the call and you did want to have some more questions answered, just get in touch with the NWR guys, and I'm sure they'll be able to put you in touch with Jennifer and Paul. Jennifer and Paul, thank you so much. It's a fascinating presentation. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to these investors, and best of luck with it.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody.